It's the last day of January, 70 BC. Sailing into a port on the western edge of Sicily is a ship from the mainland. The ship carries a young Roman prosecutor, Marcus Tullius Cicero. Cicero has come with his cousin to Sicily to conduct a criminal investigation. 2 weeks earlier, Cicero had charged the former provincial governor of Sicily, Gaius, with multiple crimes. For the next 50 days, Cicero travels the width and breadth of the island. He gathers evidence to use in his prosecution. He visits all the major cities and many of the smaller villages. He copies public records and conducts interviews with the victims of Gaius Verus. He goes into the farm fields, where he calls farmers from their plowing to take their statements about how Verus nearly taxed them out of existence. He meets with mothers and children of men recently executed by Verus. In one town, he hears from priests who tell Cicero how the former governor spoiled their temple and desecrated their deity. Almost everywhere he goes, Cicero is enthusiastically greeted by the people. They look to Cicero as their savior. People turn up in droves to assist Cicero in building his prosecution case. Sicily's new governor, a crony of Verus named Metellus, tries to block Cicero's investigation with threats and arrests. Many suspect the governor's reward for his efforts is a bribe from Verus. But Metellus' meddling gets nowhere. The people's hatred of Verus knows no bounds. His work finally done, Cicero sails back towards Rome. On his journey home, he encounters pirates, remnants of slave armies, and the emissaries of Verus. It's all in a day's work. After he returns safely and is just getting settled, Verus offers him a bribe. Cicero rejects the offer. Cicero begins sifting through the mountains of incriminating evidence that he had gathered on his travels. It's time to build his case against Verus. Meanwhile, Verus and his friends spread a rumor that Cicero has accepted their bribe. Why bother showing up to testify, they tell potential prosecution witnesses. The trial will be a sham, and Verus will win. But outraged Sicilians are not easily discouraged. So who is this scoundrel Gaius Verus? How did he come to be a powerful governor? What does the Verus case tell us about the scale of corruption in the last days of the Roman Republic? Before we turn to those questions, though, a word of caution. What we know about the Gaius Verus trial comes to us exclusively from Cicero's 7 trial orations. No records of the speeches by Verus's defense attorney survive. Nor do we have from Verus himself any explanation for his behavior. Now, a prosecutor is hardly an objective observer of a trial. It is altogether possible that Cicero exaggerated the extent of Verus's abuses. At the least, he had every incentive to omit information that could have put Verus's actions in a more sympathetic light. Even so, the mountains of evidence presented by Cicero leave little doubt that Verus was a despised and unscrupulous official. If he wasn't the worst governor that a Roman province ever was made to suffer, he sure ranks right up there. Verus was born about 120 BC to a father of senatorial rank. We have hints from Cicero that Verus, like most young aristocrats of his time, led an easy and privileged life. By his 20s, Verus had developed a lust for women and for fine art. These would remain his obsessions during his governing years. For the next decade or so, Verus moved from one official post to another. Each promotion offered a greater opportunity to embezzle, ravish, plunder, or collect bribes. In 73 BC, Verus was appointed to the post of governor of the province of Sicily. Provinces were the largest administrative units in the Roman state. Sicily was the first and, at this time, the most important province in the Republic. It had a key naval base and produced crops so abundant that Sicily was called the breadbasket of the empire. It also held vast riches, including thousands of valuable statues and other art treasures. So when the plum job as governor of Sicily fell to Verus, he wasted no time in setting sail from Rome. Over the next 3 years, Verus violated the public trust in just about every way imaginable. In 3 short years, he brought ruin to Sicily's farmers, heartache to its priest, devastation to its navy, humiliation to the many women he violated, and death to those who stood in his way. No wonder that when Verus's term as provincial governor finally came to an end, the victims of Sicily demanded justice. Indeed, soon after Verus departed Sicily, representatives of the province flocked to Rome to file a formal complaint against Verus. Roman law allowed citizens of the provinces to bring an action against officials for extortion. Convicted officials could also be banished. They could be ordered to pay fines of up to 250% of the amount proven to have been extorted. Wronged citizens, however, faced an obstacle, namely that the courts were controlled by Rome's senatorial oligarchy. And juries were drawn exclusively from the same rank as the provincial governors. Jurors were either senators who had already themselves exploited the provinces, or they were senators who would like to someday. Moreover, the courts were generally corrupt. Anyone who wanted a favorable verdict was expected to pay a bribe to get it. So things didn't look good for the citizens of Sicily. But they knew who they wanted to prosecute Verus. They wanted Cicero. They had fond feelings for Cicero because of his well-earned reputation for fairness when he served as a supervisor in Sicily's Western District 5 years earlier. So they filed a request to have Cicero appointed as their prosecutor. The case intrigued 36-year-old Cicero for a couple of reasons. First, it would allow him to match his oratorical skills against Verus's defense attorney, Quintus Hortensius Hortalus. Great name for a lawyer, don't you think? Hortensius was the acknowledged king of the courts. He was wealthy, well-connected, and cocky. Besting Hortensius would be a real feather in Cicero's cap. Second, the case would give Cicero, who is a product of the Roman middle class, a chance to attack the corruption of the tottering oligarchy. Best of all, he could attack it in the name of aggrieved provincials, the innocent victims of Verus. At his core, Cicero was honest and incorruptible. Yes, he had his ambitions, and this case might help them, but his greatest desire was to save the Republic. But Hortensius had a trick up his sleeve. He attempted to block Cicero's appointment and arrange for a strawman prosecutor, a corrupt former associate of Verus, a man named Caecilius. Under Roman law, prosecutors were not provided by the state. Prosecutors were instead selected by plaintiffs. When more than one prosecutor was proposed to handle the same case, the selection was made after a hearing before a jury. If Hortensius could find a pro-Verus plaintiff in Sicily, willing to request this Verus associate to be the prosecutor, and if he could get his straw man prosecutor appointed, he'd have the case in the bag. The prosecutor would simply throw the case. So Cicero made a powerful case as to why he, and not Caecilius, should be chosen. Cicero's argument is recorded in the first of his 7 orations about the Verus case, called the Divination. Cicero argues that the vast majority of people of Sicily want him and nobody else. He points out that many Sicilians have made it clear that if Cicero is not their prosecutor, they will not even bother to appear as witnesses. Besides, Cicero points out, his opponent for the job has a conflict of interest. He lacks the skills to be an effective prosecutor, and he doesn't understand the case in the way he understands the case. But Cicero's most compelling argument is that it is in the jurors' own interest to appoint him as prosecutor. The Roman public is fed up with corruption and abuse of office. Senatorial power is now hanging by a thread. If Verus is acquitted with the help of a strawman prosecutor, all hell might break loose. It is time for senators to signal to the non-noble class that they can police the worst of their own. Do that, he says, or lose your privileges. The jury does the right thing. Cicero is appointed prosecutor. For Hortensius, however, the fight over the choice of a prosecutor had a potential benefit. It pushed back the start of the trial. You see, the defense attorney wanted to run out the clock. Why? Because, luckily for Cicero and the people of Sicily, the Verus case had been assigned to a judge who Cicero considered beyond reproach, Manius Azilius Glabrio. Luckily for Cicero, however, Glabrio's term as judge would end in 11 months, on December 31, 70 BC. Verus might fare better with a less scrupulous judge. So the defense strategy became delay, delay, delay. As anxious as Cicero was to get on with the case, he knew that he must first gather the evidence to prove guilt. So he asked for and was granted a 110-day adjournment. That would give him time to travel to Sicily on the fact-finding mission that I described at the beginning of this lecture. The adjournment, however, gave the defense a chance to try its second trick. The day after the Verus case was adjourned, Hortensius found a partisan of Verus who filed an extortion charge against the Roman governor of Macedonia. Then the defense attorney asked for a 108-day adjournment of that trial to May 5th. Hortensius' move put the Macedonian case one day ahead of the Verus case on the judicial calendar. With Hortensius now pulling the strings, the Macedonia extortion case dragged on and on and on. But the judge was on to his strategy. He took the very unusual step of allowing jury selection to go ahead in the Verus case, even while the Macedonia case was being tried. And the 25-man jury of senators chosen by lot turned out to be a good one, frustrating another defense strategy, bribing Verus's way to acquittal. But by midsummer, Cicero was getting nervous. The case would have to begin soon, or it would stretch into the next year and fall into the hands of a judge who was a partisan of Verus. The fall would be taken up by a series of festivals and games. Court adjournments already on the calendar stretched for over 40 days. In August, however, the Macedonia extortion case finally limped to a conclusion. The case of Gaius Verus was called. To save time, Cicero abandoned the usual course of a long opening statement. Often, these arguments stretched for days. Instead, he delivered a short but very damning speech against Verus. In the Verrine oration, it is called the Actio Prima, or first plea. He tells the jury, or judges as he calls them, "We will make Verus's guilt so plain to you by witnesses, by private documents, and by public records that no long speeches will be necessary." We know what Cicero says, but we also have a good idea as to how he said it. His own rules for rhetoric give us some clues. Speeches, he said, should be made with the right arm extended like a weapon. Anger, he advises, is best expressed in high-pitched staccato phrases. And when emphasis is necessary, stamp your feet with vigor. So, in his first plea, we can picture arm-extending, foot-stomping Cicero reminding the senatorial jurors that the Republic is facing a crisis of public confidence, a crisis that threatens their prerogatives as senators. Only by doing the right thing in this case can the public confidence in the Senate be restored. He also complains about the defense's strategy of delay. He explains how it will force him to let the victims speak for themselves. He would love to add his own explanations as to how the evidence proves Verus's guilt, but there just won't be time for that. It is a brilliant decision. The jurors will hear the facts and nothing but the facts. Fact after fact after fact. Cicero ends his oration with a formal statement of the indictment. "I declare that Gaius Verus has not only committed many arbitrary acts, many cruel ones against Roman citizens and the provincials, many wicked acts against gods and men, but in particular he has taken away 40 million sesterces out of the Sicily contrary to the laws." Cicero demands Verus, if convicted, pay the maximum fine allowed by law. With his opening speech concluded, Cicero immediately calls his first witness. And over the next 9 days, one aggrieved person after another takes the stand. Collectively, they leave little doubt about Verus's corruption. We do not have a trial transcript. We don't know the exact words that any witness spoke. What we do have are Cicero's 5 carefully edited orations, together called the Actio Secunda. The orations lay out for all the world to see the evidence he amassed against Verus. Something to remember here. We should view Cicero's orations as intended less for the Verus jury and more for the Roman public. Cicero's main goal is to send the message that Rome will no longer tolerate men who govern through extortion and corruption. The orations do not lay out the crimes of Verus in chronological order. The evidence is grouped by subject matter. Each oration or book addresses a specific set of crimes. Book 1 describes the alleged crimes of Verus before he took office in Sicily. Book 2 speaks to his abuse of his judicial prerogatives. In Book 3, Cicero tells the story of Verus's plunder of Sicilian farmers. Book 4 describes Verus's illegal seizure of private and public works of art. And finally, in Book 5, Cicero addresses Verus's use of unauthorized punishments and his mismanagement of Sicily's naval forces. Now, time does not allow us to consider all the evidence, of course, presented against Verus, but let's look at a sample of the incriminating evidence from books 3 to 5. Let's start with book 3. No crime of Verus more outraged Sicilians than did the governor's abuse of farmers through the manipulation of tax laws. The jury probably considered it the most serious of Verus's many crimes. See, in Sicily, farmers paid annual tithes on their crops. The larger the crop, the larger the tax. And the system had worked well, both for farmers and for Rome. But Verus abolished this system. Instead, he gave his henchmen the power to tax farmers at whatever rate he deemed appropriate. And typically, this meant farmers paid about 3 times what they did before Verus arrived. In his oration, Cicero tells what this change in the taxing system meant. He tells the story of 3 brothers, all of whom were farmers. Cicero says the brothers fled from their lands because more corn was demanded of them than their lands had produced. Verus's tax collector and his men took away the brothers' corn, all their tools, all their slaves, and drove off their livestock. And when one brother begged to have his property restored to him, the tax collector ordered the man seized and strung up on a wild olive tree. Cicero says, an ally and friend of the Roman people, a settler and cultivator of your domain, hung suspended from a tree in a city of our allies. Under Verus, lands that had been cultivated for generations were abandoned. Many farmers fled or committed suicide. 50 to 75% declines in the number of active farmers could be found in some districts. In just 3 short years, Verus turned the former breadbasket of the empire into a province barely able to feed its own citizens. Now, squeezing farmers for money was nice, but what Verus really lusted for was art. And in Book 4, Cicero tells us what Verus himself calls his passion, his friends call his disease, his madness. Cicero suggests that Verus's preference for Greek works over Roman showed him to be a man of poor taste. This should be taken with a grain of salt. Cicero was appealing here to the jurors' prejudices. Romans of Cicero's time had a low regard for all things Greek. In fact, Verus's choice of art that he sees shows him to be a man of very good taste. Now, one of the witnesses who traveled to Rome to testify against Verus was Gaius, the owner of perhaps the most lavishly adorned home in Messanus, Sicily. Cicero describes his witness as the most accomplished man in the city from every point of view. Cicero notes his home featured a private chapel of great sacredness. The centerpiece of his chapel was a set of 4 marvelous figures, including a marble Cupid, which once adorned the Forum at Rome, a brass of Hercules, and 2 other bronze statues. Gaius told the jury that Verus ordered the 4 figures removed from his beloved chapel. Yes, Verus did offer him a trifling sum for the treasures, but he would never sell his most prized possessions for any amount of money. Verus took the marble Cupid and installed it in his own lavish home. Cicero says, "What impudence is this? Cupid had no wish for the house of a pimp and the establishment of a harlot. He was quite content to stay in that chapel." Wherever he went, Verus combed cities and villages in search of pieces of art worthy of seizure. In Heluncium, located on a steep and rugged coastline, Verus summoned the chief magistrate of the town down to the shore. There, the magistrate found Verus lounging on his portable couch. Verus waved his hand and ordered the magistrate to gather all the embossed silver and Corinthian bronzes in town. "Cart them all down to me," he said. Cicero describes the scene that followed. What do you suppose took place in this town? What an uproar! What a weeping of women! Vessels were brought out without their cases. Others were wrenched out of the hands of women. Many people's doors were broken open and their locks forced. Everything is brought down to the shore. Verus inspected each piece. If he saw an ornament that struck his fancy, he stripped it from the bronze and added it to his own private collection. Witnesses from the town of Tyndaris told jurors that Verus had no more hesitation about seizing public art than he did about privately held art. In their town, nothing was more valued by the residents than a beautiful statue of Mercury. Not surprisingly, Verus ordered the Mercury statue taken down and shipped to his own treasure storehouse. The local population rose as one in opposition. A local magistrate, backed by the local government, ordained death for anyone who even touched the figure. Verus didn't think much of the local magistrate's order. He had his henchmen strip the judge naked and strap him onto a bronze equestrian statue in the middle of the town's forum. Cicero describes what happens next. It was the depth of winter. The weather was bitterly cold. A heavy rain was falling. What torture he suffered when he was bound naked in the open air, in the rain and in the cold. The insult and barbarity ends only when the people, moved by the atrocity of Verus's conduct and by pity for his victim, promise him that statue of Mercury. They cry out that the immortal gods themselves would avenge the act. Now, Verus knew this story about the poor naked magistrate wouldn't play well with the jury. Before trial, he tried to head off testimony. He promised townspeople he would return Mercury to them if they agreed not to testify against him. No deal, they said. In Book 5, Cicero tells us the tale involving the commander of Sicily's fleet, a man named Cleomenes. Verus chose him not for his naval experience, but rather to get him out of the way so Verus could better enjoy the commander's gorgeous wife. Verus, it seems, had an almost insatiable appetite for sex. Cicero offers this colorful description of Verus on a harbor shore surveying his passing naval fleet. Verus stood in his slippers, clad in a purple cloak and a tunic reaching down to his ankles, leaning on a prostitute. One day, Cleomenes and the other 5 vessels in the fleet were sailing off the coast of Sicily. They encountered pirates. When the pirates approached the fleet, the commander, drunk at the time, turned tail and set off towards the safety in the fastest ship in the fleet. Now, this exposed the other 5 vessels, and the pirates captured all of them and burned them. News of the disaster at sea did not sit well with citizens. An angry mob gathered around Verus's residence at dawn. Cicero offers this account. A rush of people towards his house takes place with great impetuosity and loud cries. Then Varus, being roused, comes forth. He hears the whole news. He comes forth into the middle of the crowd, bewildered with wine and sleep and debauchery. As all this is happening, the pirates do a taunting victory lap around Syracuse harbor. Now, Varus understood that the sea disaster might lead to his prosecution. The captains of the 5 destroyed ships could have been powerful witnesses against him. Varus offered this solution to the problem. He forced the captains to sign false affidavits, casting the blame in other directions. And then, for good measure, he had the captains arrested and charged with treason. He arranged a trial before a biased tribunal, which included none other than Commander Cleomenes, and the captains were convicted and executed. End of problem. Cicero also tells of another time when the usually incompetent provincial navy actually managed to capture a pirate ship. Now, when news of this capture reached Varus, quote, he was lying in his tent on the shore with a lot of women and drunk. Varus steadied himself and ordered all the pirates brought to him. Now, instead of punishing all the pirates, Varus divided them up. Cicero reports, quote, that all the prisoners who were old or ugly were executed, while those who had beauty or youth or skill in anything, he took for himself or friends. One lucky Varus chum got 6 talented pirate musicians as a present. Unfortunately for Varus, the citizens of Syracuse wanted to see justice done, and that meant executing pirates. They compared the number of pirates executed to the known size of the ship's company. And when a discrepancy became apparent, citizens demanded executions for all the pirates. Varus's solution? Well, Cicero says Varus began to substitute, in place of the pirates whom he had taken, citizens whom he had previously thrown into prison. He also ordered his henchmen to round up workers in a stone quarry, mostly anonymous refugees from Spain. He ordered the prisoners and stone workers' heads covered with veils, and then had the bunch led out to be executed. There you go. Now the totals match up. We could go on. There were many, many more stories. As the witnesses' stories mounted up, Hortensius realized that the evidence against his client was so damning that nothing could be done to save his client. In fact, Varus could endure only 3 days of his trial. First, he claimed illness and stopped attending court. Then he accepted the inevitable. He fled Rome while the going was still good. The jury found Varus guilty in absentia and ordered him to pay a fine, probably a substantial one, but there exists no record of the exact amount. Varus remained in exile in what is now southern France for the last 27 years of his life. In 43 BC, Antony demanded that he return the plundered Corinthian vases he had managed to take with him. And when Varus refused to comply, Antony had him summarily executed. As for Cicero, he claimed victory over the great Hortensius. In the eyes of many Romans, the trial made Cicero a hero, a rising star. Cicero's final 5 orations stand as the most important source for our understanding of the abuse of the provincials in the dying days of the Roman Republic. Not only are the orations the largest single publication of Cicero's career, they might be the largest single publication of the 1st century BC. See, publication was an enormous undertaking. Each copy had to be laboriously copied by hand. The fact that Cicero undertook the immense effort of publishing his orations tells us something. He believed the Varus trial was very important. First, he saw the trial as a means of educating the Roman public about the corruption and rot in the system. And second, he sought to capitalize on the success he achieved in the trial. For all his good qualities, Cicero was a vain and ambitious politician. Spreading the word of his victory in the Varus trial was great PR. It helped lead to ever more important roles in Roman politics, and it cemented his reputation as the best advocate of his time. The Verus trial ultimately was not just about Verus. Historian Frank H. Cowles observed, Verus had been only a type. He had stood for the whole corrupt system. It was for more than the condemnation of one man that the orator had striven.